Excellent. Well, we'll get started here this afternoon. So welcome to the NAADSN Ideas series, and thank you for joining us. So our panel today is going to speak for about 30 to 34 minutes, and then we're going to open it for discussion and questions posed through the chat function. Just a few logistics to go over here this afternoon. If you could please remain on mute for the duration of the call, but we would love to hear if you have any questions or comments or feedback for our panelists, whether if you want to pose them individually to each one for a specific question or to the panel as a whole. If you could convey those to me, my name will come up as Shannon Nash within the Zoom functions, and you can do those through the chat, whether it's privately or to the group. And I'll pose several questions as much as time will allow anonymously from the chat to our speakers. And just to go over, just to introduce ourselves, if you're new to NAADSN, we are a collaborative network providing timely, relevant, and reliable advice on North American and Arctic defense and security. We're the North American and Arctic Defense Security Network. We address core policy challenges, and those main three are the defense role in the Arctic, NORAD modernization, and the future of North American defense and the evolving role of major powers in global strategic competition. And there are many intersection points within those. We conduct leading edge research with students, emerging scholars, northern stakeholders, and rights holders that test core assumptions and prompt policy innovation. And we convene conferences, workshops, and symposia, and these NAADSN Idea Talks here that are now have gone virtually, that bring together diverse stakeholders. And we're currently working with a strong group of NAADSN research assistants who are conducting policy relevant research. And next week, in fact, we're hosting a NAADSN student seminar that will bring these students together, as well as many of our NAADSN mentors and members. So please visit our website. It's just at the bottom of the screen there, naadsn.ca, to learn more about our research. And follow us on Twitter for updates, and that's at the tag there at the bottom as well. And to introduce our panel today, let me just get these notes up. So our NAADSN Ideas talk today is on present and future challenges to governing emerging technologies. So our first speaker today that we are thankful to have join us is Kristen Chenke, and she is a PhD candidate in global governance at the Basili School of International Affairs. Her research focuses on cyber governance and the management of cyber operations and innovation in Canada. She is a junior fellow with the Defense and Security Foresight Group and the 2020 Women in Defense and Security Canadian Global Affairs Institute Fellow. And Kristen is also one of our NAADSN graduate fellows as well. And today, Kristen will discuss governing the futures of emerging technologies. And emerging technologies can pose threats to security, but also opportunities for Canada. So we look forward to hearing from you, Kristen, and I will turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Shannon. So emerging technologies are new innovations that can cause disruptive change within society. They can disrupt the old ways of doing things and knowing about the world. AI, quantum computing, the Internet of Things, and 5G are examples of emerging technologies that can cause change in international relations and national security, among other areas. This presentation broadly highlights the challenges of managing emerging technologies and offers solutions for Canada in navigating through the gridlock of governance. First, I will identify the three main impacts of emerging technologies. Second, I showed that Canada can move beyond the impasse of the associated risks of emerging tech by improving the process of governance through a number of avenues. My colleagues Josh and Nina will focus on two processes in particular within their presentations. The purpose of this panel and the presentations is to discuss and contextualize governance approaches and its application to emerging tech. So when we securitize emerging tech, we associate them with risks. Canada's National Defence Policy, Strong, Secure and Engage, sees the uses and the management of emerging tech as a defence and a security issue. Within this framework of Canada's defense policy, adversarial actors can use these technologies to develop a competitive edge and engage in threatening behavior more efficiently. There are three ways to think about the risks relating to emerging tech and their impacts on Canadian society. Number one, national sovereignty of innovation. Number two, threats to critical infrastructure. And three, data and network security. The nationwide adoption of emerging tech, such as 5G, can impact the national sovereignty of innovation. Foreign companies may seek to establish themselves in Canada as leading providers of certain technologies. Although market diversification can have benefits, larger scale questions of data and IP ownership and foreign influence can cause security problems. Emerging tech can pose threats to an increasingly digital and connected critical infrastructure. Canada needs to carefully navigate the dynamics of state-sponsored and non-state actor-sponsored attacks against critical infrastructure. For example, cybersecurity threats ripple through all industries and sectors, threatening sovereignty and national security. Canada needs to be prepared for securing critical infrastructure while protecting Canadians. Threats to data and network security include advances in quantum computing. Changing global technological standards can have an impact on sovereignty, and policy must address rapid technological challenges that give states the ability to set standards, specifications, and practices for other states. These three issue areas show how the impact of emerging tech can have profound impacts on Canada, including the security implications. Canada needs to manage these threats and navigate the governance of these technologies. The task is not easy, and there are many roadblocks or gridlock in the way of meaningful progress. The intersection of emerging tech and the governance of their associated risks is blocked by this gridlock. Gridlock is a self-reinforcing cycle of interdependence between institutions where solutions to problems are difficult to achieve. Gridlock is not only frustrating, but is also a threat to the international liberal order. This is because it causes fragmentation between states, institutions, and other actors as they struggle to manage problems. The inability to effectively address problems can cause distrust in institutions as well as their abilities. Combined with the disruptive nature of emerging tech, the problem of gridlock can become amplified. Thus, Canada needs to take measures to effectively navigate the governance of emerging tech, including the associated risks as well as the opportunities. While there is no single or correct solution for managing these issues, there are some options for moving beyond the problem and towards a solution. Actually, there are 7 options, and I will go through each of them individually. The first is shifts in the interests of major power players. Number 2 is autonomous and adaptive international institutions. Number 3, technical groups with effective and legitimate processes. Number 4, common norms. Number 5, mobilization for cooperation and compliance. Number 6, civil society coalitions. And finally, innovative leadership. The first path specifies that shifts in the interests of major power players can help reduce gridlock in favor of managing global problems. This means that a state could champion an issue in a specific area and lead the way in addressing the associated challenges. This could include setting and enacting priorities for other states to follow. But this depends on the willingness and the long-term planning of these championing states. However, in the current international environment, this could be difficult. The second option, autonomous and adaptive international institutions, means that some organizations and institutions can more easily adapt to changes than states. This is because they can modify their mandates to reflect developing challenges more quickly by creating new rules and pathways through the gridlock. Technical groups with effective and legitimate processes can help push through the issues preventing effective governance because, like autonomous and adaptive international institutions, they can adapt quickly to change and are generally removed from state-to-state politics. Some technical groups can also be autonomous in their solutions based on their expertise. Combined with transparency policies, their decision-making policies and processes can bring increased legitimacy and efficiency to governance. Multiple and diverse organizations and institutions can coalesce around norms to help entrench common goals within policy. Although fragmentation caused by differences in goals between institutions and states can cause gridlock, adding or expanding on existing norms may help it move the process along. A multi-stakeholder approach is also useful because it brings diverse perspectives from the many different actors, including from the private sector, not-for-profit, and even individual cities. This ensures that the issue area is represented by those who are impacted by it. From this, new norms can be created, added, or expanded upon within policy. The fifth pathway through gridlock calls for the mobilization of different actors for cooperation and compliance. This specifically refers to domestic actors and organizations that can work towards changing norms and practices at an international level. This provides an opportunity for domestic actors within a state to operate on a larger scale and develop a fresh perspective on policies that would usually be stalled by gridlock. The sixth option is civil society coalitions. Civil society coalitions can organize and gain support for certain initiatives when they partner with other organizations and states. This pathway is guided by social movements that are headed by civil society groups, and the cause is then championed by specific states. In order to be effective in the long run, civil society groups need to partner with states to advance their goals and values. Otherwise, the effects are short-term and will fail to advance the impasse of cooperation and gridlock. The seventh and final pathway through the governance gridlock is innovative leadership. Although innovative leadership can come from individuals, states, private corporations, institutions, and other actors, this entails recognizing the ineffectiveness of the current governance structures and then developing new strategies or structures to help address the problem. These new actors are so-called norm entrepreneurs who use their agency to define values and goals and then implement them. Effective global governance of international problems comes about because the current international system is complex, interdependent, and there are multiple actors beyond states who have competing and sometimes contradictory goals. This results in a gridlock of decision-making and action to address global problems. One of these global problems is the risks associated with emerging tech and their impacts. As previously outlined, 7 possible pathways exist to help advance beyond this governance gridlock. The following papers in this panel will highlight these pathways to governance of emerging tech with a focus on Canada's role. These pathways are overlapping and complementary. The impact of emerging tech on the national sovereignty of innovation, critical infrastructure, and data and network security is a key concern for Canada. Managing these technologies is as important as developing effective governance frameworks. Without effective governance, the problem of gridlock will remain. In conclusion, governance of these challenges needs to be transparent, flexible, and restructured to facilitate cooperation. These changes to governance are a path to increase accountability and responsiveness to these challenges. Since technologies advance at a rapid pace and their risks are pan-domain, new forms of cooperation are needed. These new forms of cooperation could foster transparency about the risks of emerging tech, communicate policy alternatives, and define and reinforce responsibilities. We need norm-driven policies that are interoperable, flexible, and adaptable to the changing realities of emerging tech and the complex threat environment in which they operate. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Kristen. That was fantastic. Next on our panel, we have Josh Gold. And Josh is a research assistant at Citizen Lab at the University of Toronto's Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy. His research focuses on international cyberspace governance and conflict in cyberspace. And Josh is also a board member of the Canadian International Council's Toronto branch and the Estonian Central Council in Canada. And today, Josh will discuss governing cyberspace, Canadian defense, and foreign policy. So I will turn it over to you, Josh.
Sure. Thanks. Thanks so much to NAADSN, and thanks, Shannon, for having me to be part of this conversation. I'm a mustachioed version of Josh Gold, and as Shannon said, I'm a research assistant at the Citizen Lab and also a non-resident visiting scholar at the NATO Cooperative Cyber Defense Center of Excellence, or CCD-COE. But that said, everything that I say today is strictly in my personal capacity. In my 10 minutes today, I'll talk about recent developments in Canadian legislation, policy, and strategy towards cyber defense, particularly as they concern our intelligence community and military. My broader argument focuses on governing new cyber capabilities, including offensive capabilities, which Canada now publicly acknowledges it is developing. Specifically, I'll argue that based on what I know, Canadian efforts to govern cyberspace and new military and intelligence capabilities therein have room to improve. This talk is particularly timely given that last week, Canada joined the US and the UK in attributing COVID-19 vaccine-related hacking to the Russian government. In response, Canadian Defence Minister Sajjan called for reinforcing a common understanding of rules-based norms and for deterrence against foreign actors. A separate statement together with Foreign Affairs Minister Champagne stated that we must call out irresponsible state behavior that violates the rules-based international order and strive to live and work in a cyber environment that is open, stable, peaceful, and secure. Now, this all sounds good, unless you consider the fact that unlike many of our allies and even some adversaries, the Canadian government has not clearly articulated what it should be promoting and defending and why it should be doing so, not to mention how. Despite Canada's attempts to play a leading role in upholding global peace and security, as illustrated by our failed June 2020 bid for the UN Security Council seat, Canada still lacks a clear and holistic international cyber strategy. In fact, we don't have one at all, at least not publicly. Many of Canada's closest allies, such as the US, UK, Australia, Netherlands, have released strategies to clarify their specific foreign policy goals that pertain to digital technologies and their use, both in terms of security and defense, and also in a human rights context. Our government has yet to do the same. Much of my own work focuses more on Canada's lack of a cyber foreign policy, especially regarding efforts to set global rules and norms for behavior in cyberspace, as Kristen mentioned. I believe that foreign and defense policy are two sides of the same coin, but I'll focus today more on defense and security, but of course, more than happy to speak later on diplomacy or foreign policy. Recent years have seen some significant changes in Canadian policy and legislation to better enable our government to mitigate or to respond to national security threats in cyberspace. Prominent among these changes is Bill C-59, or also known as the National Security Act, which was a major and omnibus update to Canada's national security legislation, which became law in summer 2019. Among other things, the Communications Security Establishment Act, or CSE Act, within C-59, enables the CSE, which is our Foreign Intelligence and Cybersecurity Agency, to conduct defensive and active cyber operations abroad. C-59 came from consensus among Canadian security officials and the private sector on the need for new powers to ensure defense, and also arose from the need to better interoperate with members of the Five Eyes Intelligence Sharing Alliance, which consists of Canada, Australia, New Zealand, UK, and the US. In this sense, Canada faces a bit of a challenge whereby its membership in the Five Eyes Alliance brings immense security value for sure, while simultaneously carrying significant responsibilities, restrictions, and possible contradictions with certain Canadian values, such as human rights. For example, Canada's involvement in mass surveillance activities can be seen as infringing upon the rights, including privacy rights, of non-Five Eyes citizens, and such surveillance activities now threaten the abilities of Five Eyes countries to process European data for routine commercial processes, as was seen by a major court ruling in the EU last week. To effectively address these kinds of challenges, some kind of overarching strategy is needed, rooted in an understanding of Canadian first principles and values, so as to inform what must be protected and secured and how to do so. Let me now turn to our military, which is also making big changes in how it operates in cyberspace. In 2017, the Canadian Armed Forces, or CAF, announced in its defense policy, which it would assume a more assertive posture in the cyber domain, for example, by conducting active cyber operations against potential adversaries. And Canadian military developments in the cyber domain look as though they'll continue to advance. In 2020, Canada is expected to join officially the NATO Cooperative Cyber Defense Center of Excellence, which is a NATO-accredited think tank and research center in Estonia. NATO is fast developing its cyber operational doctrine and has opened up its cyberspace operations center in Belgium. And as far as I last heard publicly, and this might be now outdated information, but 9 NATO members, but not yet Canada, have officially offered NATO their capabilities, their cyber capabilities, in the event a cyber operation is needed in response to an attack. In September 2019, Canada joined 26 other countries in affirming the Joint Statement on Advancing Responsible State Behavior in Cyberspace, declaring that signatories will work together on a voluntary basis to hold states accountable for malign behavior, and also stressing that there must be consequences for bad behavior. It's unclear what exactly this joint statement entails and the extent to which it might be followed or complemented by a like-minded so-called cyber deterrence initiative as announced in recent US strategic documents. But what is evident is the growing importance of imposing consequences on malign actors. This was further demonstrated by an October 2019 briefing note to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau that was made public in January 2020, which states that Canada's position on foreign cybersecurity threats is that rules and norms in cyberspace are critical, but they must be supplemented by measures to impose costs on hostile actors. The nature of these costs and the extent to which they'll follow international law is unknown, which can send murky signals both to Canadians and also to Canada's adversaries. Unlike key allies, Canada has not clearly outlined how it believes that international law applies or should apply in cyberspace, despite publicly calling for UN member states to do so. In the absence of clear communication concerning what Canada will and will not do, it may be difficult for allies and adversaries alike to fully appreciate our government's positions. Now, speaking of a lack of clarity and transparency, the CIF published a joint doctrine note on cyber operations in 2017, but this document remains classified and the CIF has been unwilling to make it public. In contrast, US and UK cyber doctrines have been made public. While it's certainly reasonable that secrecy towards cyber operational doctrine is necessary to some extent, it's difficult to evaluate Canada's overall approach without a sense of where our military stands. Also, Canada calls on countries at the UN to be transparent about their offensive cyber capabilities and how they'll be used, and claims that Canada adheres to such transparency itself. I'm not so sure that matches reality. Moreover, any decisions by the Government of Canada to adopt more aggressive cyber operations akin to those of the US appear to be made without substantive public input. Such decision-making processes raise significant questions as to the public's ability to debate and influence policy, as secrecy on such a major strategic approach and opacity around cybersecurity policy more broadly blocks the Canadian public from holding the government to account for its policy decisions and questions the extent to which policy has a public license. If the Canadian government is indeed following US approaches and strategy, it's unclear to what extent this fits with Canadian foreign policy values, goals, exigencies, and realities in this space. To conclude, I believe that the need for a more holistic, comprehensive, and transparent Canadian international cyber strategy has only become more pressing. While I focus today on defense and security, it all really comes down to Canada developing some kind of an international cyber strategy which ought to guide and harmonize actions by our military and intelligence agencies with other Canadian interests and goals, such as economic prosperity and democratic principles like human rights. Without a clear and public framework for how it will govern its own military and security actions in cyberspace and what it will promote or defend across the world, the Canadian government leaves key actors in the dark, from its own government units at home to its representatives and allies abroad. Ambiguity in this domain denies Canada a leadership role on a critical global issue, while simultaneously leaving Canada more vulnerable and unprepared in the event of a crisis. For today's talk, I agreed to speak on whether Canada has an adequate strategy for defending its values and interests in cyberspace. And based on what I know from public sources, at least, my answer is no, at least not yet. Thanks, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Josh. We really appreciate it. And we look forward to further questions as we finish up here. And our last speaker on the panel is Dr. Nina Bindel, and she is a postdoctoral fellow at the Institute for Quantum Computing embedded in the University of Waterloo. Her field expertise is quantum security of cryptographic algorithms. She is the principal submitter of a Q-Tesla, a quantum secure signature scheme, a second round candidate in NIST's post-quantum standardization effort. And today, Dr. Bindel will discuss ensuring security in the era of quantum computers. So I will turn it over to you, Dr. Bindel.
Thank you very much. Let me just quickly share my screen. Sorry, I hope you can see my screen fine. All right, thank you very much for the introduction and for the opportunity to speak here today. I will give a concrete example of an emergent technology and recommendations how to make decisions to protect against the threat from it. In our daily lives, we connect to numerous services, whether this is, my computer is not doing what I want. So this should be better. Now I also have a laser pointer to show you that in our daily life, we connect, for example, to numerous services when we do online banking or online shopping. Most of the time when we connect to these services, we do that via a secure connection, in particular via the HTTPS connection. In fact, more than 80% worldwide of the web pages loaded by the browser Firefox use this secure connection. To enable the secure connection, every service, for example Amazon, needs to have a certificate. The certificate, which you can actually check on your own computer, specifies the algorithm that is used to encrypt the data. So the algorithm that ensures or that protects the communication. In case of Amazon, this is the so-called RSA algorithm. Currently, we believe that the RSA algorithm is secure. That means we believe that there exists no algorithm that can efficiently break the system to get the secret key that is used to decrypt the encrypted communication data. However, this changes when large quantum computers can be built. These quantum computers can be used to run Peter Shor's quantum algorithm to recover the RSA secret key, and that means a quantum adversary can read every RSA encryption, which threatens then the safety and economic well-being of ordinary people, companies, and governments. Now, this seems to be a huge threat given that quantum computers can be built, but is that actually realistic? What is the state of art regarding quantum computing? In recent years, there was a lot of progress. For example, there's at the moment record-breaking quantum computer by Google with 72 qubits. And last year, September 2019, it was shown that actually quantum computers are in fact more powerful than our current computers. In addition to the state-of-the-art progress, there are also estimates when large quantum computers will be built. For example, Michele Mosca, a professor at the University of Waterloo, says there's 50% chance that this RSA scheme will be broken in 2031. A more conservative estimate is given by the European Union in their Quantum Manifesto, and they say that large-scale quantum computers will exist in 2035, which gives us about 10 to 15 years to switch to quantum secure algorithms. In light of this recent progress and the estimates, the US-American National Institute for Standards and Technology launched a standardization effort in 2017. This standardization effort aims at standardizing algorithms for digital signature schemes and public key encryption schemes that are secure against quantum and classical attackers. Another evaluation criteria is how these algorithms perform, but also others such as what are the applications that can be used, what are the limits of these algorithms, and so on and so forth. As I said, this progress started in November 2017 with 82 submissions, and then the second round, which was announced in March 2019, 17 public key encryption schemes and 9 signature schemes were selected. Just yesterday, the candidates for the third round were announced, and of the second round candidates, 9 public key encryption schemes and 6 signature schemes were selected. The third round is expected to last 12 to 18 months, and the standards will be available in 2022-2024. Now, it is clear that this standardization effort will impact the decision of a lot of international partners, in particular partners that are very close to the US, such as Canada. But now there's the question, should Canada have its own standards and do its own evaluation, or should it really follow the US? And three decision criteria are: how trustworthy is the standardization process of NIST, the urgency of changing to quantum secure algorithms, and also the financial costs. Let me go through and say the pro and contra of each of these criteria. So of course, Canada has high trust in its own agencies. And in particular, an argument for Canada's sovereignty in this area is that in 2015, a backdoor of one of NIST standards was found, which of course decreased the trust in NIST standards very much. On the other hand, historically, Canada has a very close partnership with the US, and they do trust each other in several areas. Another argument against Canada's sovereignty in this area is the time that is needed to standardize, to do their own standardization effort. Also, just finding new algorithm and standardizing new algorithm is not the end of the story, but we also need to transit to the new algorithms, which will also take a lot of time. If Canada would partner with NIST, then the standards would be available soon, namely in 2022, 2024, and Canada would have the possibility to focus on the transition sooner than before. The same holds also for the financial cost. It is very costly to do their own standardization, while otherwise, if they partner with NIST, the budget could spend on actually transition to quantum secure algorithms. Now, when we look here at the green and red boxes, we see the only argument for Canada's sovereignty or against the partnership with NIST is the trust. So let's take a look, how trustworthy is this ongoing NIST process? And to evaluate the trustworthiness, I give four different criteria. One is how community-based this process is. And because if it is very community-based, if a large community is looking at these algorithms, weaknesses might be detected earlier. And so this is actually something that NIST does very well. From the very beginning, and even before the standardization process was launched, they ask for feedback from the community. They have a lot of comment platforms. They also react to the comments and so on and so forth. Another way to evaluate the trustworthiness of standardization is how diverse the participants are. If participants come with a very international background and also with a diverse background coming from academia, from industry, from the government agencies, then first of all, the risk of national interest can be decreased, and also maybe different kinds of risk can be foreseen. So for example, a researcher from a university might be able to see a different risk than someone from government. And also this is done very well in this. So there are 69 different submitters from all different kinds of nationalities. A lot of them actually also affiliated to Canadian universities and companies. NIST is also doing very well in being very flexible. They allow in several points in time, they allow several tweaks and improvements of the algorithms. So attacks or weaknesses that are actually found by the community can also then be used to improve the algorithms. So this is something they also do very well. However, the last point, we will see how they do. So it's important that the standardization process and the final decisions are made transparent to decrease the risk of backdoors. By this, I mean, in particular, I'm thinking of two things. The first is that it should be checked how different the submitted algorithm is then from the final standardization, and to avoid backdoors and to avoid implementation mistakes. Also, it should be checked how well the reason is, or what the reason is why one algorithm is preferred over another. And as I said, we just have to wait until the end to see how transparent the NIST standardization process is. Based on this, I would like to give a 3-step recommendation. The first one is to form a Canadian advisory board to decide whether the NIST process is trustworthy or not. Framing this in Kristen's pathways to get out of gridlock, this would be to form the technical groups. Based on the decision of the first of this advisory board, then Canada should also standardize quantum safe algorithms, but also require quantum security for cryptographic-based security systems that protect data for medium and long-term information lifespan. And this should also be done in cooperation with the US. So this would correspond to the 5th pathway of cooperation. Last but not least, and depending on the decisions and the recommendation standards from the 2nd recommendation, there should be a risk assessment for non-government critical infrastructures, for example, financial market, logistics, or power plants, and also the security risk and how to mitigate this risk should be communicated to small and large businesses and the general public. This corresponds to the 6th pathway of coalitions with civil society. To briefly summarize, I introduced you to the threat of quantum computers and introduced you to how other countries, namely the US, try to mitigate this risk. Moreover, based on this, I gave you suggested a 3-step recommendation how to make the decision and how to plan for this to protect against this quantum threat. With that, I would like to thank you for your attention. I'm looking forward to this discussion.